Welcome to the Urban Herald. We're the show that takes a really close, data-driven look at the stories and myths that, well, kind of shape how we see the world.
And today we're diving deep into a really potent one, maybe one of the most enduring and honestly heartbreaking legends in music.
That's right, we're talking about the 27 Club.
It's just this instant recognition, isn't it? You hear those names, Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, and immediately this powerful, almost eerie narrative springs to mind.
Yeah, this idea that their incredible talent, their genius, was somehow fatally tied to them dying at exactly 27 years old. It feels like destiny, or maybe, some kind of curse.
That feeling, that sense of a curse, it's so strong. It's seeped into pop culture all over the globe for, what, decades now?
Absolutely. But our mission here, as part of the team at the Urban Herald, is to really push past that myth. We want to understand what's really driving the tragically high mortality rates among young musicians using the extensive research we've been doing.
Okay, so let's unpack this right away. How does the hard reality, the science, stack up against this really dark legend?
Well, the first hit of data is pretty crucial, I think. It kind of dismantles that whole curse idea straight off the bat.
Yeah, it does. I mean, our research definitely documents, over 50 really famous or celebrated musicians who died at 27. That number sounds significant.
It does.
But when you actually crunch the numbers, when you look at it statistically, there's just no specific elevated risk at age 27. It's not inherently cursed. The peak risk isn't actually there.
So it's like the fame of those particular individuals creates this really convincing illusion of a pattern.
Yeah.
But if you zoom out, look at all professional musicians. The risk factor changes shape.
Totally. The real danger zone, the thing we should be worried about, it's much wider and, frankly, much more severe than just one single year.
Right.
Our data confirms what some studies have shown. Musicians are statistically something like 2 to 3 times more likely to die young across their entire 20s and 30s compared to the general population.
2 to 3 times. Wow.
Yeah. So the crisis isn't some mystical number. It's systemic. It's tied to the industry, the lifestyle, especially during those peak creative and heavy touring years.
It makes sense to look at this chronologically, too, doesn't it? Because, okay, the actual term 27 Club didn't really catch on widely until Kurt Cobain's death in the 90s.
Right, that's when it became a household phrase almost.
But the source material we've looked at shows that the template, that idea of the cursed, short-lived genius that was set, like way earlier.
Oh, absolutely. You have to talk about Robert Johnson, the Delta blues legend, died back in 1938.
Decades before Hendrix or Joplin.
Exactly. He's kind of the spiritual godfather of the whole thing. He established that foundational myth about a celebrity death, long before those rock stars in the late 60s had their own tragic cluster.
Okay, so if the age itself isn't the statistical problem, then the myth really got its legs because of that extraordinary coincidence, didn't it? That really uncanny concentration of huge rock star deaths between 69 and 71.
That's exactly where our human brains, the part that looks for patterns, really latched onto it. The sheer speed of it for super high-profile deaths in just 2 years. Culturally, it was devastating, and it just seemed impossible that it could be random chance.
Let's just quickly run through that succession because it is startling. It kicked off with Brian Jones, didn't it? Founder, multi-instrumentalist for the Rolling Stones, died July 3rd, 1969.
Yeah, and Jones's death was already sort of wrapped in tragedy. He'd actually been fired from the Stones just weeks before, mainly because his substance abuse had gotten so severe he was unreliable, unwell.
And the cause of death.
He drowned in his swimming pool. The coroner called it death by misadventure. But that whole cloud hanging over him, the drugs, the apparent mental instability, it was already setting a kind of narrative stage for what followed.
And then, just over a year later, September 18th, 1970, we lose Jimi Hendrix. A revolutionary guitarist. Redefined rock music in, 3 short years? Achieved almost mythical status.
Hendrix's death was almost the archetype of the rock and roll tragedy, wasn't it? In a London hotel room, asphyxiated on his own vomit after taking way too many barbiturates. The loss was just immense. Here's this guy, boundless energy, unbelievable innovation, just cut down right at his peak. The reaction was disbelief at first, but it quickly shifted into this kind of tragic narrative that, such explosive genius just couldn't last long.
And the pace, it just didn't let up. Barely 2 weeks after Hendrix's October 4th, 1970, Janis Joplin, that raw, powerful blues rock voice, found dead.
Yeah, Joplin's death from a heroin overdose really hammered home the toxicity of that environment, especially, for women in rock back then.
That's a good point.
Male artists often had their excess kind of romanticized, but Joplin, Her vulnerability as a woman navigating that super male-dominated, hard-partying scene felt particularly stark. She was all raw emotion, and losing her right after Hendrix just created this feeling that rock culture itself was maybe fatally flawed, self-destructive.
And then, as if to just hammer the point home, seal the idea of some sinister pattern, Jim Morrison, the Doors frontman, dies exactly 2 years to the day after Brian Jones, July 3rd, 1971, found in a Paris bathtub.
Morrison's death is still probably the murkiest of that whole cluster, which of course just adds fuel to the mythological fire, right?
Right, because there was no autopsy.
No autopsy. Official cause listed as heart failure. But the circumstances around it, known heavy substance use, the kind of secrecy around his burial, it all just fed this legend that the Lizard King had made some kind of dramatic, mysterious exit. So you have these 4 foundational superstars, Jones, Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison, all dead within 24 months, all linked to the chaos of that counterculture era, and all 27. It might have been statistically improbable, but culturally it was explosive.
It demanded a story. And like you said, that story's template was already kind of written, thanks to Robert Johnson, decades earlier. Let's go back to him. Why is he so central, even though 27 Club wasn't a term back in 1938?
Well, Johnson is just critical because his whole story, his narrative, it perfectly captured that trope we keep talking about. The transcendent talent whose life is tragically cut short.
The Faustian bargain myth.
Yeah.
Selling his soul at the crossroads.
Exactly that. That piece of folklore, which really got popular decades after his death, claimed he was just an okay guitarist who vanished for a bit, went down to the crossroads of highways 49 and 61 in Mississippi, met the devil, and came back with this supernatural mastery of the blues.
It's a hell of a story.
It is, and it wasn't just a cool story, it offered this dark, almost satisfying explanation for why someone so gifted had such a brief career and died so young, at 27. It directly links genius to some kind of supernatural heavy price.
And his musical legacy is just undeniable, isn't it? Those 29 songs he recorded in just 2 sessions, 36 and 37, they're like the bedrock for so much that came later.
Absolutely foundational text. You can draw a direct line from Johnson to Muddy Waters to the Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton. I mean, his work really is in the DNA of rock and roll.
And his death, just like the 70s cluster, it's wrapped in that same kind of mystery that just invites myth-making.
Yeah, the most common story is that he was poisoned. Strychnine-laced whiskey, supposedly given to him by a jealous husband at a juke joint called Three Forks. He apparently collapsed, lingered for a few days, then died. But there are conflicting accounts, even 2 different claimed grave sites. It all just adds to the enigma.
So he really established that live fast, die young blueprint.
He did. Unwittingly, perhaps, but he provided this cultural template, a path for tragedy that later artists, consciously or not, seem to follow.
Okay, so the template's there.
Yeah.
It bubbles under the surface in rock history for decades, but then it explodes back into the mainstream consciousness in the 90s, really transforming it from just rock trivia into this pervasive cultural meme.
Right.
And that watershed moment has to be Kurt Cobain.
Oh, absolutely. Cobain's death in April 1994. Self-inflicted gunshot wound, less than 2 months after he turned 27. It wasn't just a tragedy, it reshaped the cultural landscape. And it was the moment the club got its famous, kind of grim nickname.
From his own mother, right? The source material highlights that heartbreaking quote. Now he's gone and joined that stupid club.
That quote was a turning point. It showed this immediate contemporary awareness of the curse, not just among fans, but right inside the artist's closest circle.
And there's that chilling aspect mentioned in some biographies, like Heavier Than Heaven, that Cobain himself might have talked about wanting to join the club when he was younger.
Yeah, which raises that really uncomfortable question. If an artist, especially a vulnerable one, knows about this potent myth, does the myth itself start to exert some kind of psychological pull? Does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy?
It's a disturbing thought. And Cobain also represented a bit of a shift in the archetype, didn't he? It wasn't purely the sort of hedonistic excess of the 70s rock gods.
Right. Cobain's struggles felt different. They were defined by things like chronic physical pain, severe depression, anxiety, and that intense, agonizing conflict between trying to maintain artistic integrity while dealing with overwhelming global fame and commercial pressure.
His death really brought issues like suicide and mental health struggles into the national conversation in a new way.
Definitely. And the media immediately and explicitly linked him back to Hendrix, Joplin, and Morrison, cementing the club idea in the public mind for a new generation.
So if Cobain resurrected the club for the sort of MTV television age, then Amy Winehouse really locked it in for the digital era, didn't she?
Absolutely. Her death in 2011 was probably the first truly global viral moment for the 27 Club phenomenon.
She died July 23rd, 2011. Accidental alcohol poisoning.
Yeah.
The details are just devastatingly clear. A blood alcohol level of 0.416%. That's, what, more than 5 times the UK driving limit?
Yeah, staggeringly high. But the context around her death is also really important here. She actually died while she was actively trying to deal with her alcoholism. She'd reportedly kicked drugs.
Right, I remember that. And that final performance in Belgrade. It was painful to watch. The whole world saw her struggling in real time, essentially.
Exactly, and the digital reaction to her death. That's the key thing for our analysis here.
What happened online?
Almost instantly. Within hours of the news breaking, the hashtag 27 Club, just exploded worldwide on platforms like Twitter.
Wow.
Instantly.
Yeah.
It showed just how deeply that myth had embedded itself in digital culture. It spread faster than official confirmations. It became this immediate global shorthand, a meme for celebrity tragedy in the internet age.
And that digital speed really highlights the power of cognitive bias, doesn't it? How we selectively remember things. Which brings us to who actually gets membership in the public mind.
Precisely, because the digital era just confirms how selective our memory is when it comes to this club.
Yeah, everyone knows the sort of big six: Jones, Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison, Cobain, Winehouse. But as our research notes, there are dozens, maybe scores, of other professional musicians who died at 27, and they get forgotten.
Take Al Wilson from Canned Heat, great blues guitarist, vocalist. He died September 3rd, 1970. That's right in the middle of that original cluster between Hendrix and Joplin.
Right, so why isn't he usually mentioned?
Well, Canned Heat was successful, but Wilson wasn't quite that global household name superstar like Hendrix or Joplin, so his death got far less media attention, and the public consciousness just kind of filtered him out of the 27 Club narrative.
Or think about Anton Yelchin, the actor. He was also in a band. Died in 2016, age 27. But it was a freak accident with his car, nothing to do with substance abuse or suicide.
Exactly. But because he was 27, the media coverage immediately started making connections to the 27 Club.
Just because of the number.
Just the number. It proves that it's really fame and maybe the type of death, not just the age itself, that determines who gets remembered as part of this club. We notice the ones that fit the pattern: famous, maybe a bit troubled, died at 27, and we unconsciously ignore the ones who don't quite fit, like less famous musicians who died at 27, or equally famous ones who died at 26, or 28, or 30.
Which brings us neatly to the actual science, the statistical debunking. This is really the core of the Urban Herald's findings, isn't it? For so long, the 27 Club was just accepted as fact. But then researchers decided to really test it rigorously.
Yeah, that was a landmark study back in 2011. Published in a really respected medical journal, the British Medical Journal. The BMJ researchers in Australia did it.
And what did they look at? Not just the famous ones, right?
No, they were thorough. They analyzed the ages at death for over 1,000 famous musicians, solo artists, band members who died between 1950 and 2010. Crucially, they needed proper comparisons.
So groups.
Exactly. They compared the musicians' mortality rates not just against the general population, but also against, I think it was a large group of UK artists specifically. They were looking for any statistically significant spike in deaths around age 27. The hypothesis was basic. If the club is real, mathematically, you should see a big jump in deaths right at 27, way more than at 26 or 28.
And the main finding, as you mentioned earlier, was pretty clear-cut.
Utterly unambiguous. No increased risk of death for musicians specifically at age 27.
But did they find any ages where musicians faced higher risks than the general population?
Oh, they definitely did. And this is where it gets really interesting, actually. The study found significantly higher mortality for musicians throughout their 20s and 30s, like we said, but the most statistically significant specific peak ages for death weren't 27. They were actually ages 32 and 56.
32? That's fascinating. Why 32, do you think?
Well, you could speculate, right? Maybe that's the point where the initial rush of fame wears off, the real grind of the industry sets in, financial instability becomes chronic, or the long-term effects of substance abuse really start to catch up after that first decade or so.
56.
That likely points to the cumulative, delayed impact of decades of the lifestyle. The chronic stress, the lasting damage from earlier substance abuse, manifesting as serious health problems later in life.
So the key takeaway is, the problem isn't a magic number. It's chronic, it's industry-wide, and it affects musicians across a much broader age range, especially in their 20s and 30s, with specific danger points later too.
Precisely. That 1969-71 cluster, as visually striking and culturally significant as it was, turns out to be statistically possible just by pure random chance when you look at the sheer number of musicians working over those decades.
Okay, so the statistics say the myth is fiction, but clearly the belief in it is incredibly powerful and persistent. We really need to unpack the psychology behind why this story grips us so tightly, even when the evidence contradicts it. It's like a perfect storm of cognitive biases.
It really is. Several psychological phenomena work together to make it feel true. First up, the big one, confirmation bias.
Right. So once you've heard of the 27 Club, your brain starts actively looking for examples that fit. Amy Winehouse dies at 27. Bam. Filed under C. It's real.
Exactly. But when, say, Chris Cornell dies tragically at 52 or a less famous musician dies at 28, our brains don't flag those events as strongly in relation to the club. They don't fit the pattern we're primed to see, so they fade from that specific narrative context much faster. We essentially collect only the evidence that confirms what we already suspect.
And then there's our basic human need to find patterns.
Yeah, the pattern recognition brain. Evolutionarily, spotting patterns was crucial for survival. Those berries made someone sick, that noise means danger. But in modern life, that same instinct makes us want to find order and meaning, even in random tragedies.
So attributing these deaths to a curse or a club feels more meaningful than just accepting them as, well, terrible luck amplified by risky lifestyles.
It fulfills a deep need. It imposes a narrative structure on chaos. It feels better psychologically to believe these awful losses happen for some significant, almost preordained reason, rather than just being the grim outcome of addiction, mental health struggles, and industry pressures.
And the third piece you mentioned, the availability heuristic.
Right. This is about how easily examples come to mind, because the names associated with the 27 Club, Hendrix, Cobain, Winehouse, are so incredibly famous, so culturally iconic, they are instantly available in our memory.
They pop right into your head.
Exactly. And because those examples are so easy to recall, we massively overestimate how common dying at 27 actually is for musicians. We can all name the big six instantly. But could you, off the top of your head, name 3 equally famous musicians who died at age 32? Probably not, even though the stats suggest that might be a more significant peak. That ease of recall creates this powerful illusion that 27 is uniquely dangerous.
This web of biases then leads to something even more complex, which recent research has looked into. The idea of memetic reification. That sounds complicated.
It sounds academic, but the concept is straightforward and kind of disturbing. It basically means a belief, even if it starts out false, can become real because of its consequences in the world.
How did that apply here?
Well, this 2023 follow-up study looked at the cultural consequences. They analyzed things like media coverage, length of Wikipedia entries, posthumous album sales, overall cultural impact.
And what did they find comparing artists who died at 27 versus, say, 26 or 28?
The difference was dramatic. Musicians who die at age 27 receive significantly more media attention after death. They get longer biographies, more documentaries made about them, greater overall cultural canonization. Essentially, dying at 27 makes you more famous posthumously.
Wait a minute, so the myth doesn't just explain why some artists die young. It actively influences which dead artists we as a culture decide to elevate and remember most intensely.
That's exactly what the research suggests. It's a feedback loop. The myth exists, so deaths at 27 get more attention, which makes the myth seem more real and important, which means the next death at 27 gets even more attention.
And the chilling implication there.
The implication is, if a young artist is struggling, maybe with addiction, depression, feeling lost, and they know, culturally, that dying at 27 guarantees this kind of iconic, tragic status, this ready-made narrative, does that knowledge, that cultural saturation, inadvertently create a kind of morbidly attractive template? Does it make that specific age feel like a meaningful way out?
That's the thing. Yeah, that's a deeply uncomfortable thought. The myth, even though it's statistically false, might actually be creating real-world harm by romanticizing death at that specific age.
It shifts the whole conversation, doesn't it? We've gone from debunking a statistic to analyzing what might be a self-perpetuating cultural pathology.
Okay, so if the club isn't real, if 27 isn't the cursed number, we absolutely have to pivot to the real causes. What is behind that genuinely elevated risk for musicians in their 20s and 30s? We need to look squarely at the systemic failures within the music industry itself.
And those factors are depressingly concrete and, importantly, potentially preventable. Top of the list still, is substance abuse.
It's almost a cliche, but it's true.
It is, and historically the industry didn't just tolerate drug and alcohol use, it often normalized it, even glamorized it. It was seen as part of the creative process or the essential rock and roll lifestyle.
And the actual lifestyle of a touring musician just pours fuel on that fire, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Completely. Think about it. Chronic sleep deprivation, constant travel across time zones, the pressure of performing every night, the isolation, the late nights. It's a recipe for self-medication, whether it's for performance anxiety, boredom, or just coping with the sheer physical and mental strain. Use can escalate incredibly quickly into serious dependency.
This ties directly into mental health, creating that vicious cycle.
Absolutely. Our analysis and many studies show high rates of underlying mental health conditions among musicians: depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, PTSD, even chronic pain conditions that get self-medicated. But the industry historically has been terrible at providing support.
Artists treated more like products.
Often, yeah, like content generators or economic units that just need to keep performing regardless of their internal state. Plus, there's often been a real stigma, especially in certain genres, against admitting vulnerability or seeking mental health help. It didn't fit the tough rock star image.
And beyond the internal struggles, there are huge external pressures too, like financial instability.
Yeah.
People assume rock stars are loaded, but that's a tiny minority.
For the vast majority of working musicians, income is incredibly unpredictable. There's often no safety net, no reliable health insurance, constant financial stress. And the shift to streaming music has made this much, much worse for many.
Right, earning fractions of a cent per stream.
Exactly. So album sales aren't providing that cushion anymore. The main way to earn a living is relentless touring, which of course feeds right back into the lifestyle pressures, the burnout, the substance use, the mental health strain. It's a horrible cycle. And if you don't have good health insurance, getting consistent treatment for addiction or mental health is incredibly difficult.
That constant disruption, no routine, poor diet on the road, being cut off from family, friends, normal support systems, it's incredibly isolating. And sometimes the excess isn't just tolerated, it's actively enabled, isn't it, by managers, labels.
That definitely happens. That's the exploitation aspect. Sometimes the people around the artist prioritize short-term profit. Keep the tour going, keep the records coming over the artist's long-term health and well-being. They might push musicians who are clearly struggling, encourage them to maintain a party persona that sells even when it's destroying them. Young artists, especially, might lack the power or support to push back.
So we really need to shift the whole frame here. Stop talking about mystical curses and start demanding practical, structural changes. I keep thinking back to that quote from the BMJ study authors.
The one about musicians contributing greatly to our quality of life.
Yeah. This finding should be of international concern. There is immense value in keeping them alive and working as long as possible. It puts the focus squarely on prevention and support.
And the encouraging news, based on our research at the Urban Herald, is that things are starting to change. Slowly, maybe, but there are emerging reforms, a growing awareness within the industry that things have to be different. We're moving, hopefully, from just reacting to crises to building more proactive support systems.
Like what? What are some of these positive changes?
Well, one big one is the push for sober touring options. More artists, more tour managers are insisting on alcohol-free and drug-free backstage environments, having sober companions on tour. Basically acknowledging that the old sex, drugs, and rock and roll cliche isn't just outdated, it's actively dangerous and incompatible with a sustainable career, let alone survival.
And mental health support is becoming less taboo.
Definitely more part of the conversation. There are organizations now specifically focused on musician mental health, helping artists access therapists, counselors, sometimes even psychiatrists who understand the unique pressures. Things like teletherapy are huge, allowing artists to maintain contact with the therapist even with erratic tour schedules.
That makes sense. And what about the financial side?
That's being tackled too. Groups like the Musicians Union and other advocacy bodies are fighting hard for fairer compensation from streaming platforms, trying to make the economics more sustainable. And there's a big push for better access to affordable health insurance for musicians, recognizing that financial stability and healthcare access are fundamental to overall well-being.
And just managing the workload itself, the relentless touring.
Yeah, we're seeing more artists negotiating for performance schedule limits in their contracts. Things like mandatory days off between shows, limits on consecutive travel days, trying to build in basic rest and recovery time to prevent that extreme burnout that can trigger a crisis. It's a shift towards valuing the artist's long-term health over just maximizing tour dates.
So when we wrap all this up, this deep dive into the 27 Club, It shows us a story, a narrative, that's incredibly compelling, culturally sticky, but ultimately deeply misleading.
Yeah, the club itself seems to be a potent coincidence. A statistical blip, really, that got massively amplified and then sustained by the way our brains work, by confirmation bias, by focusing on fame, and more recently, by the speed of digital media.
And the final conclusion, pulling together all the source material we've analyzed here at the Urban Herald, it seems unavoidable.
It really does. The real curse isn't turning 27, it's the system. It's an industry that, for far too long, romanticized self-destruction, failed to protect its talent, provided inadequate support, and sometimes treated artists as disposable commodities. The deaths of Hendrix, Joplin, Cobain, Winehouse. They weren't just cultural tragedies, they were, in many ways, preventable system failures.
And perhaps the best way we can honor their incredible game-changing legacies isn't by repeating the myth of the Cursed Age.
Exactly. It's by demanding real systemic change, by pushing for an industry that prioritizes protecting, stabilizing, and supporting its artists, especially when they're young and vulnerable. That's the challenge, really, for us, for you listening, and for the industry itself.
This whole exploration of the 27 Club has taught us something really powerful about how culture works, hasn't it? A really compelling story, especially one amplified by our own psychological biases, can completely overshadow objective facts, rigorous evidence.
It's a stark lesson, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, maybe the pattern we should be paying attention to isn't the handful of famous deaths at age 27. Maybe it's the tragically high number of talented young musicians we lose at every age, often due to these same systemic issues of addiction, mental health struggles, and industry pressure.
So the 27 Club becomes a case study in critical thinking.
I think so. If a narrative as powerful and widely accepted as the 27 Club turns out to be built largely on coincidence and cognitive bias, well, it forces you to ask, what other patterns, what other cultural truths that we just accept might actually deserve the same kind of critical reexamination? That's definitely something for you, the listener, to think about next time you encounter a compelling, perhaps tragic, story.
A really provocative thought to leave us with. Thank you for joining us for this in-depth analysis on the Urban Herald.